Good evening, folks, and happy Halloween. And welcome to Here's the Deal. How'd you like it, Marvin? How'd you guys like our new intro we had made for the
It,
show? It's the very first time we used it live.
it's fun, that's for sure. Um, Rumble's
Certainly.
mad at us. Give us half a second here, Shiloh.
Yep, I see that. So, yes, we're going to have a Halloween edition of Here's the Deal with our brand new intro. But we got a pretty good show tonight, Marvin.
Yep.
Oh, you're working on Rumble still?
Yep. Give me
So,
half a hot second here.
sure. Technical difficulties. We're
Oh,
always used to that, aren't we?
yeah. I forgot to push a button. You know, it'd be better if you paid me to do all the tech support stuff. And I thought I fired you last week. What are you doing back on?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
Everything turned out okay with work, though? You got home safe
Yep.
and all that fun stuff?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was about 3:00 in the morning, and yeah, it was a long one. But no, there was no one hurt, so we escaped injuries and stuff like that, which is good. So, but yeah, it was a real good deal.
I thought you were good at pushing buttons, Marvin. Yes, those are not the buttons I'm good at pushing. Anyway, I was going to dress up as you tonight, but the only cowboy hat we have in the house is a pink one. So happy Halloween. I'm dressed up as a podcaster. Well, with that, we have Dave Roetman joining us. He is from South Dakota and has gotten hired on up here for the NDGOP executive director, and it's been kind of a fun 10 days for him in North Dakota. 11, I think, total. But we'll get into that part of it a little bit later in the show. But we're going to bring Dave on, let him talk about himself a little bit, where he's from, how he got there, and why he decided to move where the air hurts his face.
All right, let's bring him on.
Let's bring Dave on here.
Good evening, Dave. How are you?
Good morning. Sorry. Good evening.
Yeah, it depends on what time of year it is. This could be good morning too if we're still dealing with legislative session. So,
thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
I do like your intro, by the way. That's cool stuff.
Thank you.
You like that? Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
It's our first time that we used it. We just got it last night from the fella who made it for us. So we've been working on that for a little bit now. So the branding iron was actually made by a coworker of mine here. And so we taped all of that and he put it to work for us. So we're really pleased with it. So it's better than the countdown that we've had for a while. So
I need to have some sort of intro music for my blog, my podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, the guy that did it did an amazing job. So shout out to him, especially putting up with all the vetoes from our wives on pictures to use.
That's funny.
But in my house, I don't know about yours, Shiloh. Mama knows best. So if he was happy with it, we're doing good. So Dave, why don't you tell us about where you came from originally? Like, are you from South Dakota? Are you from someplace else, or?
I'm from Northwest Iowa, a little town called Rock Rapids. When I was growing up, that's a very Republican area of the world, of the nation. When I was growing up, at least several years ago, there were, I believe in my home county, Lyon County, don't quote me on this, this is several years old, 5,600 Republicans and 700 Democrats. So pretty much everybody where I was growing up was Republican, my whole family. And so I was never one of these guys who was liberal when he was young. I've always been a conservative, always been a Republican. I went to Augustana University in Sioux Falls, and I sort of stayed in town in large part because of the tax situations, no income tax. But I studied, I'm going to date myself, government international affairs and Soviet era studies. So I was kind of preparing myself for the Cold War, and the Cold War ended right when I was graduating. But I learned a lot about the ideology of the left, Marxism, that kind of stuff, as in preparation for my lifetime of anti-communist studies.
Well, that's kind of cool. So stayed around in South Dakota after finishing up in Augustana. Did you get into politics right away, or did you do?
Well, as a volunteer, I kind of worked in archaeology for a while, and I worked in my family's in my family's optometric clinic. But I was a volunteer for some of the campaigns early on, like especially when Thune was running against Daschle back in the 2000s. And I was volunteering. A lot of times what I'd do is I'd go into these volunteer offices and I'd say, you guys are doing a great job. You're working like 24 hours straight and you're eating stale donuts. What you really need is food. So I'd go home and make a batch of bread and stew and bring it in and let people, so they wouldn't starve. So that was really my contribution in many cases, and volunteering at the offices afterwards. But in 2011, my dad told me to stop complaining about the party and get involved. So I went to a county party meeting, and they made me the treasurer. And from there, I started doing party stuff. I became the chair of the local county party, and eventually I moved into the state party operations. And so I've done things like I've been the finance director, been the political director and data director. I do a lot of data. I haven't handled South Dakota's data since 2013 with a little break in there. But, so I've had a lot of training from the RNC about data and finance training too. So I took advantage of those things.
So like by data, do you mean like the emailing list? Do you mean like the walkbook lists? Was it a mix of everything? Because like I know when I was campaigning for Secretary of State, I had gotten a couple of email lists, and there was quite a few people that had responded back to emails that went out that said, I don't know why I'm getting this. I'm not a Republican.
Sure. Yeah. So I handle mostly voter data in South Dakota. Of course, we have voter registration in South Dakota. So it's the voter data list through the RNC Data Trust.
Yeah. So is it easier to get that kind of information because of the voter registration when it comes to like who's signed up as a Republican, who's signed up as a Democrat, things like that? Because around here, it's like pulling teeth to get anything.
Yeah, I've noticed that. It is easier to because you have a voter list, but there's always a catch to it too. These voter lists are maintained by the government, and a lot of people don't make a lot of effort to update their data. So there's been a number of complaints in South Dakota about the quality of the data, the fact that there's people who've moved, and it's not necessarily all that accurate. And you have to have somebody in charge there, somebody in the Secretary of State's office, somebody in the auditor's office, who's actually paying attention to stuff. There's been some grassroots organizations in South Dakota Canvassing, who've done a really good job. They just go door to door, and what they did is they targeted some households, single family dwellings that have multiple people registered to vote, multiple surnames. So like obviously what's happening is that people are moving, the voter data is not being updated, and they remain on the voter list. The new Secretary of State, Monet Johnson's working to change that. But it's a matter of somebody has to be watching the store. And you got to make sure that the voter data is cleared out, and then you have rules that apply to everyone equally. And if that's happening in a place like South Dakota, imagine what's happening in other states. Other states that are less concerned about the integrity of their voter lists.
Well, and you look at here, like the DOT and Vital Records are the ones that are supposed to be providing all of our election information. And if you look during COVID, some of the executive orders that came out of the government's office delayed getting your licenses. It delayed reporting on vital records. Like, I mean, you could go, what was it, 3 months, Shiloh, past your expiration date to get registrations done, title updates done, stuff like that, which rolled right through the election season, which was entertaining all by itself. So, like, those voter lists through South Dakota now, is the party still paying to get a hold of those? Sorry to get right into
sure. I can talk about the background stuff. So what happens actually is the RNC has something called the RNC Data Trust. Okay. And several years ago, they just kind of took over purchasing voter lists in the various states because they didn't want to keep relying upon the state party. So back in the day, back in 2014, the state party would buy the voter lists from the Secretary of State. And then we'd send them over to the RNC. And, I was quite happy to do that. I got to learn a lot of stuff and like to talk to the data people. But a few years ago, they decided the RNC, they're just going to do it themselves. And that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot easier for them. There's less waiting around for somebody on the ground to actually do it for them. So they take care of that themselves now.
So That's interesting. Christy, how is dealing with her when you're with the RNC, when you're working with them? Governor
I
Nome.
really didn't have a lot of contact with Christy Nome with the RNC. No, it's just the RNC's. If you think about it, the RNC is not the only Republican organization in the country. So
Yeah.
we've got the Republican National Committee, which is kind of the overall umbrella. We also have the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the National Republican Congressional Committee, and those obviously are concentrated on the Senate races and the congressional races. So really, if you're running for office for like the Senate, the NRSC probably gives you the most resources. And they're well funded, and they've got some really good people involved there. That I like to think of the NRCC and Republican National Congressional Committee as kind of scrappy because they've got every 2 years everybody's up for election, and they just don't have the kind of resources that NRSC has, and they are fighting for all these races. But you also have RAGA, Republican Attorney Generals Association, and you've got all kinds of these other national organizations that deal with specific things like Governors Association. And long story short is that the Republican Party is not just one united type of legion. It has multiple committees. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because no one organization can do everything, right? You like the Senatorial Committee, they concentrate on the Senate because that's very important. And then they have the resources to come in and help Senate races. And that's true also at the local level. We have state parties. And then in North Dakota here, we have district parties also. And those are very important because those are the guys on the ground. They know the locals, right? And other states, they'll have county parties and they'll have district parties. And in some cases, they have really well put together city and municipal parties. And you got to understand it's really more of a franchise in some ways. And that's how it's kind of organized. But there is an overall under the umbrella of the Republican National Committee.
Well, I mean, you look at North Dakota, you have different groups all over the place, but really, I mean, with South Dakota, did you guys what was your state conventions like? Because I know our last one was pretty contested.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story because North Dakota and South Dakota have very different systems because you have a caucus system and the South Dakota Party has a primary system. So what happens in South Dakota, you have delegates to go to convention, and what they do is we have these convention after the primary. So the Senate races, that is the primaries for the Republican Party, the governor's race are already settled. And what they do at the convention in South Dakota, they nominate statewide office holders that are not on the primary ballot, which is largely what we call the constitutional officers, Attorney General, Secretary of State, Auditor, Treasurer, Public Utilities Commissioner, School and Public Lands. I think that's all of them. Might be missing one. But those are the kind of the races that are not in the primary. And a larger reason we do it that way is because it's expensive to run a statewide race. And so if we had a primary for all these other races, that would be very expensive money test to get on the ballot. Whereas a convention, you have to convince the majority of the delegates to support you. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but the North Dakota convention is way larger. In 2014, for example, I was involved in organizing that one. We had 400 delegates, and that was considered a huge convention. The 2022 convention was 600 delegates, and that was really large also. But obviously, you get multiple times that in North Dakota because you have a caucus system, and that's the main reason, the main way that you select your candidates. So obviously, there's going to be more people involved at that level.
Yeah, well, and like primary here, you go toe to toe in primary against fellow Republicans, fellow Democrats for statewide races. So Secretary of State. But the other kind of rule that they have here, and I don't know if they're looking at removing it, but so say I, as a Republican, don't want to deal with the primary. I want to go straight to November. If I declare myself independent, I'm out for 6 years for receiving Republican endorsement.
It's interesting. I didn't know that. That sounds like a rule just for enforced party discipline. Otherwise, the party would fall apart. But I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, 6 years, you're out. So, and our our gentleman that ran for Senate here against Hoven in November, Rick Becker, he is a former Republican legislator. And yeah, with that party rule in place, 6 years before he can receive Republican endorsement. So if he would run for something else, he's kind of out in the weeds.
But if you've got the,
it's really interesting. It's really interesting is in 2018, our Secretary of State, the guy that won the primary, he resigned. Our standing SOS ran as an independent. He's the only one to successfully win a statewide race in North Dakota as an independent. Mm-hmm. Yet he's in my district, so I still see him at all the district meetings, even with this new rule. So it's kind of a weird kind of rule for thee, but not for me sort of thing. Because, yeah, I find that one interesting. Because
you have the resources and talent to win a race as an independent, that takes a lot of gumption. So you got to admire somebody that can successfully pull something like that off.
So, well, I came in with no resources and still took 33%. So I'll take it. But that's entirely beside the point. So now you're through 2022 here. You guys have a new Secretary of State. Mm-hmm. It sounds like she came from the grassroots side of things and booted out the incumbent. How long have the incumbent been in position?
So the previous person, he had been. You get 2 4-year terms. There's a term limit for Secretary of State. So he had been in there 1 term. Previous to that, he was another incumbent office holder. I think he was the treasurer before that. And so he had basically 12 years of elected government service at that point, elected official service at that point. So he had won 3 elections up at that point. So he was an incumbent. And then again, yes, he was removed basically by a grassroots organization. And that's exactly how the process works. I mean, you have to get the most delegates to support you. Again, it's a little bit more complicated because the delegates represent their counties, and the number of votes the counties themselves represent is the number of Republicans who voted in the last governor's election. So some counties have more votes than others, and then the delegates split those votes at convention. So that way it's proportionally represented. But again, you had around somewhere over 600 delegates showing up, and she won the majority. That took a lot of work doing that because he was an incumbent. And I helped seat a large number of delegates to the precinct committee positions, which are the delegates to convention. And that's how we won, through grassroots organization.
So North Dakota, like one of our biggest grassroots organizations, is the North Dakota Sons of Liberty. They founded up in the Tioga areas where the parent chapter is. They've extended chapters all over the state. South Dakota, it looks like, just looking stuff up, what is it called? The Patriot Ripple Effect? Is that the largest group down there?
I'd say it's one of the more larger ones, and I am involved with Patriot Ripple Effect. They started right after the inauguration of Joe Biden. And there were some folks that had never been involved in politics before, ever. And they started this group. And they started meeting and having basically twice monthly meetings. And they started expanding a little bit. And I learned about them, and I just showed up at a meeting and said hi. And I started giving a little advice about how to organize politically. And I found out, I'm going to back up just a little bit. In 2016, I was county party chair, and I was kind of supporting Trump. And I went down to some rallies for both Trump and for Hillary Clinton just to scout out the opposition. And I got to tell you, I went to the Hillary Clinton rally. I think she was in Iowa, Sioux City, I think. And it was like crickets. People were not thrilled. They were just kind of down, and they just kind of looked down, and there was not a lot of energy there. Okay, this is very interesting. Talked to a few people, but I didn't have much in common with folks. But I went to Omaha to a Trump rally, and I started talking to people, and I was on the floor, and there were people there that had never voted before, people who were registered independents before, people who were even a few Democrats. And I was looking around, and at that time, everybody was poo-pooing the idea of Donald Trump was going to win. They just poo-pooed that idea. And I looked around, and I didn't have a crystal ball, and I didn't have access to data. But I came back and said, Trump's going to win, hands down. He's going to win this in November, and he's going to win because his supporters are massive. They're enthusiastic, and Hillary's people are down and they're not interested. And look what happened. Now, something kind of similar happened in 2022 in 2020 after the Trump's loss. There are a bunch of people who were ticked off, and they started getting involved in politics. People who've never been involved in politics before. People have never they voted, but they've never to a county party meeting, never went to a Trump rally. These are people that there's new to politics. They were not happy about the way things are going. And those are the people that started showing up at ripple effect meetings. So that's one of the larger ones. In Sioux Falls, we have chapters in Brookings and Watertown. And ripple effect is largely predicated on the notion of local action. They're not involved with state. Is that me?
No, that was me.
Okay.
My wife was sending me a picture in the living room. Sorry. I got a 6-year-old couple rabbits. So
the ripple effect is dedicated not involving itself with statewide races. We don't involve ourselves with Congress or Senate or governor or anything in those statewide races. We're involved with local races, local legislative races, yes, but also city council, school board. And in some cases, what I did is I went to there and talked to them. I have a little bit more experience than most of the people involved in ripple effect. And one of the first things I told people is like, you folks, I know you're mad about stuff. You don't like Mitch McConnell, and you don't like what's happening in Arizona at Maricopa County, and I agree. But there's nothing you can do about these things. There's nothing you can do about Kentucky unless you move there and decide to vote. Right. There's nothing you can do about Arizona, Maricopa County. Yeah. There's hinky stuff going on there. It's pretty obvious. But getting mad about stuff and hanging out on Facebook and complaining does no good whatsoever. If you really want to be involved in politics, especially if you want to involve yourself, what I would suggest getting involved with local political activity. And for example, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, there are citizen advisory boards, right, that advise the city council, advise the mayor of the city how to do things. There's a parking board. There's a historic preservation board. There's library boards. There's at one point I counted there's 47 of those boards. 47. It's a lot. And you might think that this is not important, but look what's happening in other parts of the country. They're tearing down statues. Let me give you an example here. And most of the people I was talking to at Ripple Effect were not that enthusiastic. They wanted to do big stuff, right? They wanted to change the elections. They wanted to change national policy. But a couple of people listened to me, and one person in particular joined the parking board. Okay, you'd think that parking board would not be a political thing, right? They're going to determine where they build up parking ramps and how much we should charge for downtown parking during the weekday, stuff like that. But by gosh, they had there was a parking ramp in Sioux Falls that had this big blank wall, and they got approached to spend taxpayer money putting a mural on that wall. Well, that one person from Ripple Effect said, no, we're not spending taxpayer money on art. This is taxpayer money. If someone wants to donate money for art, that's fine, but we're not spending taxpayer money. And they put their foot down and said no. Well, lo and behold, a local philanthropist, a very successful businessman who generously donated $40,000 to put a nice little Art Deco mural up there, right? That was great. So completely unoffensive Art Deco mural. You know what? If you go down to the Sioux Falls newspapers, Dakota Scout and Argus Leader, the left is beside themselves. They're angry because they didn't get their mural up there. And of course, what did they want? They wanted this $40,000 to go to their artist, right? And they wanted to have rainbow butterflies and stuff on this mural. It's a perfectly innocuous, not particularly interesting Art Deco thing. But you can see this was a victory in the culture war. Because if it wasn't for that one person from Ripple Effect who got on the parking board, we might have ended up with some, culturally leftist taxpayer-paid mural on the side of a building for years. But you can see how local activity is important. Local or the culture war is real, and it's important that you involve yourself in your local government first and grow from the grassroots up. Gain experience in politics, gain experience in how to be and operate in municipalities and county government, and then you can rise up in these local governments like the city council and the county commission. I think it's really important for activists to realize how important local government is, and activity in local government not only improves their local municipalities and their homes and their neighborhoods, but also gives them experience so that they can do more in politics later on.
So I have a question here. You kind of touched across Trump a little bit earlier. What did John Thune do to piss off Donald Trump?
Gosh, I don't know what's going on between the.
Because I mean, you look at like 2022, it was all over the news that he had broke the curse, the Trump curse, because he didn't get endorsement and he still won. And like, you always wonder about stories like that, like we're like Bible Belt heartland. What's it take for one of our senators or representatives to piss off Trump enough where he wants somebody primaried out?
Well, I can tell you from that 2016. This is public knowledge that Thune urged Trump to drop out and allow somebody else to be the nominee in 2016. That was public. And otherwise, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes between them. Yeah.
Well, and I didn't know. You hear circles and you hear rumors, and I didn't know if you had heard any rumblings along those lines as to what was going on.
There's all kinds of speculation, but I don't take any credence into it unless I have some facts.
Okay, that's enough about South Dakota, though. Let's talk about North Dakota for a minute.
Yes.
How do you even find out, or where do you go to apply to be the executive director of the NDGOP?
Oh,
because
well,
I know it sure doesn't show up on Indeed job fair sites or anything. And if you go to the state website, that doesn't have a banner on it like a lot of businesses that say apply now. These positions are open. So, like, what kind of process do they reach out to you? Do you reach out to them? Is there some secret back page that nobody knows about you got to apply to get on?
Nothing like that. There's a limited number of people that have my kind of experience, and so when you're on the political scene like that, there are party officers who are connected with the RNC, connected to other parties, and they usually know people, and they start putting out the word. And so I happen to know some people in the North Dakota Party, and they asked if I was available, and I submitted my resume for that. So that's basically how that went. Now, it's not like they're trying to keep people out. It's just that there's a limited number of people who have my kind of experience that can do the political executive director type job.
Well, so with that being said, what does an executive director do?
Yeah,
if you may.
Well, okay, yeah. So that's a good question, because obviously you have to understand how to campaign, right? You need to know how to do the door-to-door grassroots stuff, putting data together. Usually executive directors have a lot of experience knocking on doors themselves, which I do. Making phone banks, putting phone banks together. It's the block and tackling, the everyday campaign stuff that you need to know in order to oversee people doing those jobs themselves. Also, you need to know FEC rules and campaign finance rules to keep the party out of trouble. For example, in the past, I've been right in the center of a door-to-door campaign. I was like, okay, we're violating some rules here, right? We have when we're going door to door, we need to have a slate card for everybody, and we can't just have one federal candidate. And so I ended up calling the treasurer, consulting counsel, and putting a stop to an accident. Really, it wasn't on purpose. Nobody's doing anything wrong on purpose. Is that okay? We can't violate these FEC rules, right? FEC rules are a big deal. Also, knowing how to raise funds, just knowing the processes of how to raise money, where to raise money, how to put together events is a big deal. Those are kind of the skill sets an ED needs. And really, it's also staff and overseeing the staff who do that kind of stuff. Parties typically have an executive director, a data director, and a finance director, and then they might have some political directors, depending upon the size of them. But all those tools that are available, they're different from the ones that are commercially available. For example, if you're doing a business, you might have Salesforce, but if you're in politics, if you're in a state party or a campaign for Senate, you would use Aristotle, which is specifically designed for politics. So just knowing how to use those tools is a big deal.
So when it comes down, you go through this process. I mean, was there a bunch of other candidates? Was it you and like one other person, or did we see like 5 or 6 possible ones? Because we've had a lot of major changes in our party structure in the last couple of years here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of curious, because you said you know people up here and somebody had kind of mentioned it to you. So it's like, I was just kind of curious, like, did you know what kind of pool you were in, or did you know kind of, did you go through stages of interviewing, or was it just some background checks and we'll get back to you sort of thing?
No, so it was an extensive process. Now, the number of people who applied, I can't give you an exact number. I just don't know. But it was more than a dozen, I believe, people who had applied. And I went through 4 interviews, all of which were 2 hours long. The last of which accumulated, and I drove up to Bismarck to show them how serious I was, and I had a 2-hour interview in the offices. So and they did a background check on me. They actually, in fact, called South Dakota and talked to people who don't like me and asked them their opinions of me. And they liked what they heard, even from people who don't like me. And so that's kind of the process they went through. They went through very in-depth finding out what my skill set was, questioning about my skill set, making sure that I knew what I was doing, questioning me about my experience and what I would do as executive director. And moreover, just doing the thorough background check on me.
So you get through the process, you get all said and done. Like, this is just morbid curiosity. Like, ballpark, what's like a starting salary for a position like that? Because I mean, it's all run on donations, things like that. So you're kind of curious, like, hey, is this something that everything that you've just rattled off, because obviously they're going to be going through the process again, like, is it really, obviously it's worth your time to move from South Dakota to North Dakota, but you never hear that sort of thing when you ask those questions. Everybody's like, you get paid for this? And like, I mean, when was the last time we got paid for doing the show?
Yeah, I understand.
So like, you get curious about that. Like, what's the starting salary look like? Is it based on experience? Do they offer benefits? Like, I'm just morbid curiosity here.
Okay. Well, I'm in the matter of discretion, I'm not going to give you an exact number, but just to let you know, they did give me offer some benefits, and also the pay was sufficient to lure me up here. But then this is one of the things I told them too. I'm established in South Dakota. I'm an older gentleman, and I own my own properties. I have no debts, and I'm willing to take lower pay for an interesting project, right? So it's not like I needed to come here for the money, and it's also typically like executive directors tend to be in the younger range. They tend to be in their early 30s. And a little bit mid 30s maybe. And that has a lot to do with the fact that they put in a lot of overtime. And moreover, it's often in an itinerant job. That is, an executive director will go from state to state. Oftentimes you have a 2 or 4 year gig as an executive director. Obviously, I was planning on being here for 2 years. So it's not like you can really set down roots and become, have a career. It's not like a bank CEO or anything like that, where you can sit there and rise in the ranks for 30 years. So oftentimes political jobs, political operatives, the political staffers that go from one campaign to another. Think about it. If you're in a campaign like a Senate campaign, well, you're only actually campaigning once every 6 years. So you might be campaigning for 18 months out of every 6 years. So you got to move from job to job. So it's really political people with experience. They often move around the country. Most states aren't large enough that you can have staffers just hanging around all the time. And small states like South Dakota, North Dakota, it's really would be difficult to find full-time staffers who are campaign staffers really know their business, have a lot of experience, and stay in that state. Oftentimes what they do is they would leave a state like South Dakota or North Dakota and go to some state like Pennsylvania, and that's where they'd live for a while, or they'd bounce around a little bit before finding a home.
Well, in your case, you landed kind of right in somebody's crosshairs, didn't you?
I sure did. But
So,
I couldn't understand what I was getting into.
How did you incur the wrath of Rob right out of the gate? Like, I think you were here like 7 days.
About a week. Yeah.
Started.
Honestly, I've never met the man, and it's not personal as far as I'm concerned. I don't get mad, and I don't take things personally. And I think the reaction to these comments on tweets, these weren't even my tweets, right? I never put anything vulgar or really offensive on my Twitter account. Sometimes things come across my feed and I comment on them. And usually things like, bye, or, that person seems nice, that kind of stuff. And I think that's, and I tend to be a little bit more blunt about things, especially when it comes to cultural stuff. And it's often, I do this in a bantering tone. So if somebody has something up there and I'm bantering with them, I'm not doing it because I want to provoke them. It's because they've already started that process of banter. And so they had to really dig to find these comments because they were buried. Nobody found it. I didn't even know they were there because, I'd make a comment once every 2 weeks or something like that on something that crossed my feed. And almost all my stuff, you can go to my Twitter feed at Dave Roetman, and I encourage anyone to just go there and look at the stuff I post, the stuff I comment on, and see what it's like. It's mostly political. I bust on the Democrats, and I have very strong opinions about liberty, freedom, the loss of our freedom of our country, my concerns about the direction of our country, and I, stuff about the decline of our republic. And that's really what I talk about mostly. It's all political stuff, ideological stuff, quotes from classical authors, that kind of stuff that I put on my feed.
Yeah. Well, and I saw kind of a pattern too. It looked like you were a darling with the Dakota War College press too.
Honestly, I don't know what's going on there with him.
I mean, I do our research before we have our guests on, and I found a lot of stuff from like Dakota Free Press. I found a lot of stuff from a couple other places, and then I had stumbled across articles from the Dakota War College. And not to like chastise or try and beat you down, but it's like you almost wonder if they didn't reach out to the press association up here just to keep their trolling of you going, because there's stuff there where it's like, okay, well, it's a pretty interesting site too.
It does seem coordinated,
and so like there's no such thing as coincidence, if you know what I mean. But yes. I know we did have a couple people that have reached out about some of the comments too, and like a lot of our charitable organizations, a lot of our like up and coming organizations, we have a lot of younger female executive directors and stuff too. And like, I know the broad or the dame comments had upset a few people, and then trust me, my phone blew up about them. So they're like, well, you're going to have them on. Can you ask about this stuff? Because like, you look like at like our Turning Point USA faith director, Naomi, she's 24, and it wasn't from her specifically, but they still work with the different alliances, the different groups, the GOP, the Young Republicans, the stuff like that, which would, as executive director, you're going to be dealing with all that stuff too. And it became a question of, well, that was the past. Is it going to be something similar once you're here? And so it's questions that I got, because I have 2 daughters of my own. My oldest is 24. My youngest is 6. So I want them involved in this stuff moving forward. But you see so many people that get turned away, like Trump on Twitter. You can take every good thing Trump did as president, and I swear to God, there's sometimes people should have just tapped him up the backside of the head and told him to put Twitter down. because you look at that stuff and you look at his kind of past. It's like you want positive role models throughout leadership too. And so like even like my personal social media, there's a lot of times I want to share things, but I think of everything that we saw with Trump and I put my phone down, I walk away, and I think about it before I move forward. And that reflexive instinct on posts and tweets, I think gets a lot of people in trouble. Whether they're legislators or party chairs or even just normal people that may consider running for office, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what did I post on Facebook in 2016?
Right. Cancel culture. Yep.
So like we very much live in cancel culture. And it's vast, it's fast, it's vicious, and the trial by social media is faster than anything you're going to see in court.
Yes, I agree.
So, like, did that kind of instant notoriety lead to you deciding that you were going to step down on Monday? Like, I know it's a loaded question. I know it's a loaded question because there's a lot of stuff that happened in a very little amount of time.
Yep.
And I know my phone hasn't stopped. I don't know about Shiloh's. Like, ask him about this, ask him about that.
Sure.
I'm just want to meet the man because it sounds like he's hanging out here for a little bit. Sure. But that was one as a father of daughters I have to ask.
Now, I believe that most of my comments were more snarky and sarcastic. I'm sure there's a couple of them that are rather more salty. Now, as far as what was that?
Marvin.
Back again?
Marvin.
No, I forgot do not disturb.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. So again, none of my tweets, I understand the whole mean tweets things that Trump did, but cancel culture is real. And I'm not going to apologize for any of my statements. I made them. I'm a man who stands by his words. If somebody has an issue with it, they can talk to me about it. I remain professional in the office, and my comments were on other people's tweets, which were themselves perhaps more rude than anything that I would post myself. And again, it's more about bantering with those people who have those kind of posts. Now, perhaps it was not such a good idea, but I was a private citizen. I wasn't in the party. I wasn't representing anybody. And I was simply bantering with folks. And I was quite snarky and sarcastic in most cases.
Well, and I understand sarcasm. I speak fluent sarcasm. So, but it's just, it was very, it's been a thing. And, I don't know what your sides look like, Shiloh, because I know you asked what my phone was doing. Why don't you talk for a little bit?
Well, yeah, I had people reach out too, and they were, I got a kind of a combination of things of the comments, and then the other big question I had, and I don't know if that you can answer this, Dave, is why would the North Dakota GOP go outside of North Dakota to find talent when we have quite a few here? And I, listening to you and saying your resume and stuff, I can understand what was appealing. But my main question, and again, maybe this might not be for you, it might be for the North Dakota GOP, is if this stuff was easily found by these reporters, nobody said anything to you in the interview about all this? Like, where do you stand on these comments? I mean, I guess that's kind of a question I have is did this come up in the interview you said they did a background check on you? Most background checks nowadays they do go on your social media and see, what's this guy like?
No, they did go through my Twitter quite thoroughly. And you have to really, really dig to find these things. These are comments that I posted over years, and you got to go to other people's tweets and find my replies to other people's reply or other people's comments. And so this was not an easy thing to find. I didn't even know they were really there, in the sense that I don't see those really on my feed. It's one of those things where every once in a while I make a comment, a snarky comment on somebody else's tweet that comes across my feed, and it's nothing that I post myself. And I'd like to ask people to please distinguish between my comments, my actual words, and what I'm commenting on, because a lot of the times the issue is there's a rude or vulgar tweet that is not something I posted, but I commented on it. And oftentimes I'm being sarcastic toward that rude or vulgar tweet. And that's the issue.
So go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Marvin.
So moving forward, what do you kind of foresee? Because I mean, obviously you're committed to being up here. Like, are you going to try and get on with some campaigns? Are you going to try and work more with some grassroots campaigns? Are you going to get on board with like petition process? Like you kind of have an open playing field, and it's the coldest time of the year. So
yes, that is what excites me about North Dakota politics. And I'm very good at grassroots organization. And so that's kind of one of my main strengths. And the way I look at it, the grassroots is something that cannot be ignored by the party, because a few years ago, one of the reasons I started engaging with Ripple Effect, for example, is that I realized that these are people that are newly engaged with politics, and you have to bring them into the process or they're going to be outside the process, and that causes trouble. You need to teach them how to get involved in your local parties, what the rules are so that they can participate in the process. And, this kind of stuff happens every so often, every decade or two, is that there's a whole bunch of new people coming to the party, and the old party people that have been there a little while kind of resent it, because it's sort of like musical chairs, right? There's only so many seats. And so when the new people come in, oftentimes they have a lot of energy, sometimes they're a little bit rambunctious, and oftentimes they don't know the rules. So the best thing to do is onboard them in a friendly, welcoming manner, and let the chips fall where they may. The party is about giving people a soapbox, letting everybody have some time, but not too much time. It's the next person's turn, right? And then voting, and the majority wins. And if you're in the minority and you lose, well, come back next time with more peeps. That's get a bigger posse, because that's exactly the process. And it's always a long-term process where you have to realize that if we use an election now, you might want it 2 years from now. Point being, here in North Dakota, I'm kind of enthusiastic about your system. You have a caucus system. That's cool. And I'm from Iowa, which has a caucus system, but I think the whole caucus system in North Dakota is a cool system. Second, you have a much more diversified government than other states. You got an insurance commissioner. You've got an agricultural commission who are all elected. That's pretty cool too. I'm all about local government, representative democracy. I'm kind of old school Reagan Goldwater conservative, and I believe in what the founders founded for our country, the Constitution. And that's the best system of government. And honestly, I like the way that the North Dakota government was set up. It's I think more true to the founders' vision of local government is best, and decentralized government with leads to resistance to tyranny. And that's a really cool system. And so as far as my involvement goes, we'll see what happens. I've got skills, and I'm willing to use them. And again, I'm about the grassroots. And I don't like to point something out too. When I'm with the party jobs are different, because you have to ethically be fair to everybody. You can't choose sides. If somebody is your guy, whether they win in a primary and a caucus, and even if they might be in a faction that opposes some other faction, you have to be fair to everyone. Give them the same resources that everybody else gets, right? Whether it's data or finances or volunteers. You have to, with your party person, you have to set aside your personal ambitions, your personal animosities, your personal biases, and help everyone equally, because that's the party's job.
We had a comment roll in, and this kind of really sums up the way a lot of our grassroots people feel. When it comes to like Twitter and stuff like that, the replying with vulgarity to vulgarity with vulgarity is not the way for rational conversation. And that's where a lot of us stand. We've watched all the infighting, and we've watched all the back and forth, and we're all tired of the mudslinging, and that's where a lot of the grassroots came from. Like, we want to show up to get it done because we don't want to be there in the first place. You know, like we've lived in a Republican state for so long that so many people have just been like, they're doing it the way they're supposed to. I shouldn't have to worry about this. I shouldn't have to be involved because we have bigger things to do. We have our jobs, we have our families, we have our faith, we have all this stuff. And it's a very tight-knit community, really. But we're tired of that mudslinging because you look at so many campaigns, we don't hear about what you're going to do in office. We just hear you talk negatively about the other guy. And so that's something when you're dealing with us around here, it's a very drastic difference. We're tired of the finger pointing. We just want to see results. So, and like, that's why Shiloh ran for school board. That's why I ran for SOS. Like, it's, you see people that are coming out from behind their walls because they don't want to be there. They feel that they need to be involved.
That's a very good point. I would like to point out that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
Yeah.
And that not paying attention to politics is really not an option for people. I quite understand where you're coming from. The conservatives have a different mindset. In fact, somebody wants to invite me sometime in a grassroots group to talk about the psychology of the left. I'd be happy to do that because their psychology is considerably different than that of conservatives and libertarians and ordinary people. But ordinary people, conservatives, they want to be left alone, and they want other people to leave them alone, and they're willing to leave other people alone in return, right? They're concerned about their family, their churches, and their jobs, right? And they don't want to be bothered with politics. Well, politics bothers them. And moreover, that's not the way the left thinks. That's not the way the left operates. And so if ordinary folks and conservatives don't get involved in politics, they're going to find themselves in a world that they don't recognize. And that's why some people are suddenly realizing that their lack of vigilance in keeping their own republic has led to these dire straits. And we need to get involved in politics at the local level, and especially, and look at it as kind of a civic duty. And even if you don't run for higher offices, even if you don't run for legislature, at least get involved with your school board, at least get involved with your library board. And those are the reasons that those are the ways that ordinary citizens affect their local government and make them better. Because even if you don't serve for long periods of time, serve for years on your library board. It might be quite eye-opening what happens on library boards and the people that they hire as librarians and how they use their books. So that's what I'd emphasize to people. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and you cannot ignore your civic duty.
Well, one of the big stories that I took away from campaigning was I had gotten called to a part of Bismarck because somebody specifically wanted to sign my petition. And I had about a half an hour conversation with just the nicest gal I'd ever met. She was older, but back in the day, she had taken Ed on a tour around North Dakota when he was campaigning, Ed Schaefer. And she told me about how when they got involved, like, we're on a generational thing here, Dave, and I don't think people realize this. When they had gotten involved, they were the grassroots organization. Mm-hmm. The people that were helping at that point were the grassroots organization. They were us. Mm-hmm. But she goes, it makes me sick because we replaced all the establishment. We replaced all the forever members that were party directors and stuff like that. And we changed all that. We changed it to what we wanted it to be. She goes, but it makes me upset. It makes me sad now because we have become what we were trying to replace. And if that's not a cautionary tale, folks, I don't know what is. Like, we bust our butts. The grassroots is on the ground. You're working, you're moving, you're getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a cautionary tale to what we can become. And that's just something I want to put out there, because like it broke her heart to see where we were now.
Mm-hmm.
And to find out somebody was coming up from the grassroots. I think she signed other petitions from different members of the grassroots that were in Bismarck. But like, she told us all sorts of stories about how fun it was to tour the state and go see all these small towns, and how they had these plans for what North Dakota was going to become.
Yeah.
And to watch it change 20 years later, it's a generational fight.
Hmm.
So, I mean, the not being involved, like, you see these cycles come and go. And 20 years from now, I sure as hell don't want to be what's out there now. I don't know about you, Shiloh. Like, I still want to
No,
be
I don't.
I still want to be wild and free, because that's who I am.
So I got involved about 4 years ago. And the reason why I got involved, Dave, was because I have a son and he's autistic and he's got a slight case of cerebral palsy.
Hmm.
And you wouldn't know it looking at him. And we know what happens when communists take over, what they do to those types of people. And I didn't want my son thrown in a corner and,
That's very true.
given some kind of job, or whether they torture him or whatever they do. I didn't want that for him. I'm going to be quite honest with you. We got a lot of emails and different things about asking you about what happened in the one county that you worked at, the Minnehaha County, and different things. And to be honest with you, I don't really care. I'm just going to shoot with you man to man. I hope you're for real when you're coming up here, because we're at a place right now, not just in our country, but in our world. It's good versus evil. And I don't know you, and I'm not trying to judge you. Obviously, there's two sides to the story. And again, I don't really want to go down that road. But I'm hoping for North Dakota's sake, if you're going to stick around, that you're for real.
Thanks.
And that's all, you know what I mean? I just,
Harvin's
I
back.
have a real hard time with fake people. You can ask Marvin. I pretty much kind of come off the cuff sometimes. But we're hurting. We have a no good governor. We have a no good AG. I mean, the list goes on and on. They're all evil people. All you got to do is look at how they vote and what they're supporting. So if you're for the grassroots, I welcome you, and I hope that you are, because we have a lot of things that are not right in this state, including our voting system.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm asking you is just be straight up with us. And I'm not saying that you haven't been tonight. In fact, I kind of commend you for standing by your statements. I might disagree with them, but at least you have the fortitude to stand behind what you said and not make excuses. So that I commend you on.
Thanks.
So I guess that's
Man, let's do sometime. Let's get together for coffee. I mean, I'm available tomorrow if you can drive a couple hours out of my way if you like, and let's just talk.
We can talk off. Yeah, we can set up
We
something.
finish up. Yeah. I mean, we got some firecracker races coming up this year, Dave. I don't know if you're familiar with the legacy fund, but the legacy fund is where the tax revenue for money is supposed to be channeled. It's a 5-member board, and it's the governor, the treasurer, the secretary of state, the attorney general, and the superintendent of public instruction. The governor, in the last couple of years, has donated money to 4 of those 5 positions. So essentially, contributed to where it's going. And so, like, we need different direction there. We need different direction on how that money is handled. We need a not bought and paid for board. I'm sorry to say it any other way, but $5,000 to $20,000 towards a campaign contribution in North Dakota isn't a little donation, folks. It's not. So when we're talking about the grassroots, it's about like there's bigger things at stake than just that little stuff, because you start looking at our sub boards, you start looking at our subcommittees, you start looking at how money is spent, you start looking at where things are. I don't know how it happens on South Dakota, but in the last couple election cycles, we've had 30 some legislators receive funding from the governor for their campaign, direct contributions. So like that's what we're dealing with. When you ask people why they don't run for their district, they'll say, I don't want to run against the governor's money. Who's now a presidential candidate. So you're coming into kind of a guns blazing Wild West part of the country.
West, it's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, and even like Secretary of State, there should have been 7 other guys other than me that ran for that position. 7 other guys.
The world is ruled by the people who show up. And even though there's somebody better than you, you're the one that showed up.
No, it wasn't even that. 6 out of the 7 I spoke to personally, and they all said the same thing. I can't afford to run against the governor.
None of us can. That's, and it was just it was a miracle that Jeff,
Yeah, but Magrum won.
Yeah, Jeff Magrum won.
Twice.
And he was targeted twice with a lot of money. But Jeff pounded the pavement, and
that's exactly
Jeff's
right.
A true blue collar, come from nothing. He's a good dude. So
that's just a fair warning. Sorry, Shiloh. It's a fair warning moving
forward. May I add something here? Sure. Money is a really useful tool, but nobody should be afraid of money, because ultimately the way you win races is knocking on doors and talking to people. Politics is relational. And if people know who you are, if they get to know you, they'll vote for you. If they have a friend who knows you or a family member who knows votes for you, that's really how you win, especially when you're talking about local races, district races. In South Dakota, for example, one of the best candidates I've ever seen was a guy who spent 30 years coaching softball. Everybody knew him. He can't lose. He doesn't even have to spend money if he doesn't want to. He does. But the thing is, because of the relationships he built up over 3 decades of coaching softball, everybody knew him. I'd go down the street, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, I'm campaigning for this person." "Oh, really? Where's he at?" "He's right across the street." "Hey," they know him. Point being is that politics is relational, and if anybody takes any kind of classes or reads any books about how to campaign, door-to-door campaigning, what works. It's TV and radio ads are way distant forth from knocking on doors. Door-to-door is how you win. And that's grassroots campaigns can work, but you have to put the work in. You got to burn the shoe leather, and more importantly, you got to start early. You got to decide that you're going to do this, and you do it early, and you decide you're going to go all the way, and get a bunch of friends to help you. You can win.
That's what we've been talking about with because up here in our District 2, our 3 amigos are up for re-election, and yet we have no one that has announced who's going to run against them. And so, but I totally agree with what you just said there. Couple of things: get out there and knock on the doors,
right,
and start early. I went to a couple grassroots trainings, and there was a few of the candidates there that had won in the legislature and stuff, and they made it a goal of theirs to knock on every door in their district at least twice, and they got it done.
Yes.
On the very last day, they got it done. And that's truly, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So
I know a candidate in South Dakota here won a blue district as an independent. She was a very conservative person. She knocked on every door 3 times herself, and that's how she won.
So I asked this of every guest, and it's been kind of different to see the answers we get when we're talking about getting people involved and knocking on doors. What do you think we need to do to get more people involved? And the reason I ask this is, like, so I'm in the Williston area. Okay. There's 32,000 people in Williston. In 2022, they had, in 32,000 people, just let me ask you this. How many people do you think voted in the school board election?
Oh, I'd say around 4%.
600. Not 6,000, 600. They recalled them, and this was just in August, I think, is when the recall election was. And I mean, they had people driving around with vehicles with signs and different things for different candidates. I mean, this had gone on for quite a while before the election. They got that number up to 1,300. So I guess my question is in your opinion and in your experience, how do we get people involved again?
Gosh, that is the golden question, isn't it? Because that's what everybody asks and what everybody wants to know, because involvement is so key to politics. And everybody asks, how do we get people involved? And honestly, gosh, how do you get people involved? Because issues seem to draw people out, especially pocketbook issues. Again, we have an interesting situation in the United States here where Trump brought people out to be in politics that have never been involved before. And because they felt that he spoke for them. I mean, just some of the stuff that he said, like, for example, he talked about during the 2016 election, I remember the news media making fun of him because he started talking about home appliances and how they're not very good anymore. I mean, when I was growing up, that the dishwasher was built like a rock. You'd overload the dang thing, and you turn it on, and 45 minutes later it was all clean and dry, even no matter how crusty it was. Right nowadays, they go for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and they're wet and soggy and still dirty. But he started.
And you got to pre-rinse them before you put them in.
Yeah, and I remember within some of these GE ads or something like that, they talk about how you can run your dishwasher at half a load. Well, yeah. Of course they're saying that because if you load it all the way full, they're not going to come out clean. Point being is that Trump started talking to people, the grassroots people, the people that were going to his rallies, and he was listening to them. And they were telling him about how dishwashers don't work very well anymore. And it has a lot to do with government interference with the industry, right? Point being is that he spoke for the people. And that really drew people out. They actually felt that they had somebody speaking for them who had their interests in mind. And that's what drew a lot of people into politics for the first time. And so, again, we have more people coming into the system, coming out and becoming grassroots people because they feel like the system's not representing them, or they feel that the pocketbook and how the gas prices are rising, their incomes are declining relative to inflation, and they can't believe what is happening to their country. And so, I would say, again, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, but people just have woken up to some of these issues, and they want to get involved. I wish it wasn't traumatic events that was getting people involved in politics, but issues and the way it affects people, how politics affects people on a level, their own family, that gets what people involved.
Gotcha. I totally agree. It's just, I even said it myself on what got me involved. So I'd like to ask, being as you have a lot of extensive experience in the data world and all of that, what are your thoughts on our elections? Do you feel they're fraudulent? What do you feel like as far as our elections?
Oh, you mean overall in the country? Because North Dakota, I don't have a very good feel on, to be honest. You know what? Right. It was pretty obvious to me what happened in 2020. I mean, 6 states suddenly stopped counting, and they flipped 2 hours later. Come on. The issue is, how do you prove that? And unlike some people, I don't think it was a lot of Dominion software stuff. I think it was a good old-fashioned ballot stuffing. Remember that one video of the lady pulling out those suitcases and stuffing ballots into the box? Okay, well, good old-fashioned ballot stuffing has been happening in this country since the beginning, right? It's become much more sophisticated and widespread. I mean, we used to make jokes about how the dead would vote in New York and Chicago, and that stuff's still going on, I'm sure. Point being is that once you put a ballot in the ballot box, it looks like every other ballot, and there's nothing you can do about it at that point. You have to have good elected officials, and you have to have oversight over them. You have to have transparency in order to have good elections. And that takes a lot of time and effort and vigilance on the part of elected officials and also the voters. You can't just trust the system because somebody's going to be around to game the system. And we've had these issues in politics nationwide for centuries, literally. And we need to assess the weaknesses of our system. Look at what happened in Florida. Remember George W. Bush up against Gore, and they had those butterfly ballots? Well, they got rid of the butterfly ballots. And notice how Florida went from reform many of their laws, their election laws, and they improved their system. And they got rid of the butterfly ballots, amongst other things, and it went from a kind of a purplish state to a red state. I imagine that if we clean up our election system, we'd see a lot of purple states turning red, and we'd see a lot of blue states turning purple. And that's the way I think about election. And that's my main concern about what's going to happen in the 2024 elections is election fraud. And the problem, of course, just going back to what happened in 2020, is that it's hard to prove. Once you get the ballots in the ballot box, you can't tell the difference between them and a legit ballot.
Yeah, because when I was down at the summit, I mean, we've seen videos of them just, some of these ballots weren't even, they were just on regular paper and they were the same ballot, and it was constantly feeding the machines. I mean, we've seen all kinds of evidence down there from where they were counting ballots all over the country. So, I mean,
and nobody ever gets punished.
Yeah, nobody except Mike Lindell. They throw him under the bus and different things like that. But
funny how the honest men in politics are the ones that get punished.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. So, but no, I think that the machines have their part in it too, though. I mean, we've seen quite enough of the evidence down there as well, on video as well. So, but what do you think we need to do to get voter registration here in North Dakota?
Oh, change the laws on voter registration. Gosh, that's a huge question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer, considering I'm kind of a newbie here. But voter registration itself may or may not solve some of the problems. I'm kind of interested to find out how that works compared to other systems. Again, like I said, in other states, my experiences in Iowa and South Dakota is that if you got voter registration, that's great, but you still have to maintain the voter rolls, and you have to have somebody looking at those things, auditing them on a regular basis. Just making sure that the deceased are removed and people who moved have been notified of what's happening. And then, of course, you don't want to give a Secretary of State or an auditor arbitrary power to remove people from the rolls. You have to have a process that's fair, and you have to have a system where you can appeal. And you have to have some sort of system where you can point out flaws too. And that's one of the things I think they need in South Dakota, for example. People should be able to, for example, contact their auditor or Secretary of State and sign an affidavit saying, hey, I'm the only person who lives at this property, and these other voters who registered my property, you have to remove them from the rolls. And then the process is go through the rolls and make sure that that's legit and this person actually owns the property, and remove these people who moved years ago from the rolls. Point being, there's flaws in all systems, and I'm sure that that even if we got voter registration in North Dakota, there's still going to be problems because humans are flawed, and the nature of things is it can't be perfect.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. We're sure trying to change our system here. First, we'd like to get rid of the machines. Have you heard of the Election Integrity Act that is going on right now around the state?
I have not,
petition?
but I'd like to point out something. I really think you have to have a paper ballot. Every time you vote, you have a paper ballot. You have to have a physical record of the vote. And there's ways of trying to secure those paper ballots. And you should keep those paper ballots for a few years so you can audit them later on. But electronic voting, I am completely opposed to that. And also I'm opposed to online voter registration. That's a bad idea too. People should be able to fill out a form and sign it with their own hand.
Yeah.
And online voters registration would be a problem too, which is something they tried to implement in South Dakota. And one of the reasons that I supported Monet Johnson to be Secretary of State over the incumbent is because of online voter registration. Point being, paper ballots. Going back to the ballot thing, electronic voting is a mistake. That is so easy to spoof. Back in the day, they used to have these little clickers, click, 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 and then you would pull the lever, and then it'd count the vote using this analog technology. Well, you can cheat on that too, pretty easily. But it's much harder to do that to a paper ballot.
Yeah, I agree. So all hand counting then, right?
Well, okay. So I'm disagreeing with some of the grassroots folks on all hand counting. Hand counting can lead to a lot of problems. And I definitely think we should hand count as an audit of the electronic counting. But, the technology to count ballots, usually optical scanning stuff, is 1960s technology. It's not even, you don't even have to use microchips. You can use, hardwired analog technology, which can't be hacked. Because we used to do this for like the ACT tests and the SAT tests back in the 50s and 60s. You can scan stuff optically and count them up using old-fashioned technology, which is basically spoof-proof. And then you got to just make sure that the local auditor or the counters, they're the ones you keep an eye on to make sure that they're transparent and they're doing this right. And I do think that given the nature of counting ballots, it doesn't take sophisticated technology to count those ballots. You don't have to have online this and cloud-based that to count ballots. It's easy. I mean, yeah. So I made the example of the ACT test that used to be electronically counted back in the day, right? Well, point being is that hand counting, there's problems with that too, and it's slow. But there's ways of having like machine counting using machines that can't be spoofed. It's possible.
Okay. You got anything, Marvin?
No, it's been a good run so far. Yeah. So I got my talking done early.
Well, we appreciate your time, and I know that it was probably kind of an uneasy time for you with everything that has gone on in the last couple days. But I do appreciate you being on, and honestly, I can appreciate that. You didn't back down, or whether we agree or disagree. That's it is what it is. But I have to give you your props for standing behind what you had said and different things. So props to you for that. But we really do appreciate your time, and with that, I guess, Marvin, if you don't got anything.
No, I am good to go, boss.
Okay. We're going to put you back.
I really appreciate it. This has been a very productive conversation.
No, it's been great to have you on.
Yeah, it has. We're going to put you down in the studio just a minute. We're going to end the show, and
thanks, folks.
If you'll just hang on just right quick.
I will.
Okay. That is Dave Roetman, the former executive director for, did I hit something? Executive director for the GOP. So I thought that was a really good interview. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. I had been thinking about this in the last couple days, and obviously we both had gotten messages and different things like that. And I'm just glad that he came on. It was, even though that what happened on Monday, that he came on, he, was quite clear and he stood behind what he had to say, and what had happened. There was no excuses. Whether we agree or not, I guess that's, another thing for another time. But I'm happy that he came on and stood behind what he said.
Well, and what people got to realize is right now we're dealing with a 50-50 split in our GOP.
Mm-hmm.
It's what, 29 to 28?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of room for error when it comes to any of the votes or anything else. And I just don't think people realize that. But at the end of the day, it's ugly no matter where you're at. If you're in South Dakota, if you're in North Dakota, if you're in wherever. And it's tough coming in here because we're pretty hard on anybody from the outside, and not to make excuses for anything that's happened or anything moving forward, but
Yeah.
we're still kind of the heart of the wild, wild west, folks. But regardless, I hope you all had a happy Halloween. If
Yep.
you
Happy Halloween.
do all that fun stuff. And I got a little girl that I should probably convince it's getting close to bedtime.
Oh yeah. With that, not only do we have an intro, but we have an outro.
Oh, no way.
Are you ready?
Yep, let's play it.
Here it goes. Maybe.